Good morning. Welcome to our Q&A on the AMCAS application, how your letters of recommendation work, and sort of how that intersects with the PIR system. Hopefully most of you, I see we've got a number of participants here, and hopefully most of you had a chance to already look at the pre-recorded information, but I'm sure there will still be lots of questions. So I'm here. Also, I'm joined by Ms. Heiger, so I'll let her say hi.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all staying well.
And then it looks like Dean Jallo has her mic off, but she's here with us too behind the scenes to help us direct traffic. So we're glad you're here, and what we'd really like to do is, because we have a large number of participants already, and I think we'll have more people jumping in as we go, we'd like you to use the Q&A function to give us your questions. So there is a Q&A and a chat. If you use the Q&A function, we'll all be able to see the questions, and that'll be good. We'll answer many of them probably verbally. If there are ones that are too complicated or too specific or something like that, we might answer some of them in writing, either post the answers later or just email if it's a very specific, individual situation, email you about them. So I think we're ready to take your questions whenever you have them. So the first question is, how different is the timeline for TMDSAS, and when should I request my cover letter? In the past, we have always written for Texas residents first because their application opens about a month earlier before AMCAS. It is not clear that the timeline is actually going to be earlier for TMDSAS this year. I saw some information kind of early on that that TMDSAS would not be processing transcripts until August. I don't know if that was because of, social distancing measures in their own office, and I don't know if that's still the case. But in any case, I believe all medical schools, particularly because of all the canceled MCATs, have pushed their application review timelines back. So I don't think that you need to fret if I think that the timeline for TMDSAS and for AMCAS are essentially the same this year.
You have another question? Are we ready to move on?
Yes, and the next one says, I've shadowed many different doctors and I'm condensing those hours all into one activity, which is a great idea. Who should I put as the contact? Should I just pick one doctor? And that is what I recommend. If there's somebody that you've worked with the most, then list that person. If there really isn't somebody who stands out, if it's just, 5 people and you each spent a day with each of them, I think just pick somebody. They're really not going to contact these people. I feel like that entire section where they ask you to list contact information and put down a contact is more to prompt you to really think about it and make sure that you're not sort of padding or exaggerating your application. So this is not a high stakes decision at all. The next question says, if we enrolled in in college classes during high school, should we select undergraduate or junior college label on AMCAS? I think that this is covered in the tutorial about entering coursework, but I actually think that you can select high school, and that is what you should choose. You'll list the college name, but you will classify it as high school for the timeline. Mm-hmm. And if that is not, if that isn't completely clear, I'd say go back to the tutorial again. And then if you're still confused, send us an email and, or come to my walk-in hours and we can kind of look at it together. I'm still doing, Thursdays 1 to 5. I'm there every Thursday, and the Zoom link is on the Dean of the Day schedule online on the college website. Let's see. My clinical experience as a CNA was canceled this summer due to COVID. In general, do you think med schools will be more understanding when evaluating applications? Absolutely. Every admissions person that I've seen talk about, you know, what this semester looks like for people, it's affected them and their medical students too. Everybody is very aware that, you know, people had plans that were disrupted. I think it makes sense if you were actually offered a position or a fellowship or a research opportunity, and that you had something that was nailed down and then it was canceled, it makes sense to still list it. Now, you can't list, you could list the date of when it was supposed to start if it was supposed to start in May, since you can't submit till June. You can't list future dates. So if you're going to submit in early June and the you know, thing you were going to do wasn't supposed to start till July, what you can do is list the date you were offered the job as your start date. But then in the activity description, make it clear what the intended time period for the activity, whatever it was, would have been, and then indicate that it was canceled because of COVID. My clinical experience as a CNA was, oh, let's see, I'm sorry, that's, where?
So the next one is there a new deadline for when I should aim to send in MCAT scores for the summer's application cycle if I'm taking it during one of the new dates?
That is a great question. And I feel like there is not a one size fits all answer. So there's not one single deadline, even for this cycle. And there's still, you know, it's early May and things are still changing. And they're changing at different rates in different parts of the country. So I think that we are still in a time of enormous uncertainty, and there's no way that somebody can identify a deadline in this cycle. I think that the general sense that I have is that if people have, you know, people are able to reschedule and actually take an MCAT anytime in June or early July, and the rest of their application is in, you know, good shape, they should proceed this cycle for sure. I think if people are not going to have an MCAT test date until late August or September, unless the rest of their application is quite strong and they're quite confident that their score is going to come back really good. You know, some of you know that every standardized test you've ever taken, you know, you've gotten the very top score on it, and there's no reason not to expect that to happen again. Some of you took the ACT or the SAT multiple times and relied on super scoring and learned from the experience to, you know, sort of continue to improve your score. So knowing your own history with standardized testing and knowing the overall strength of your application would inform whether you would want to proceed with an application this cycle, knowing that you're going to have a test score coming in quite late. I don't think I'd want to wait for a score to come back necessarily from a September MCAT date before I could even submit my application for verification. It could be okay this cycle. Again, I mean, we can see when it gets closer to that time, how long is it taking AMCAS to process applications? So it's something we're happy to keep like sort of staying in dialogue with you about, and there's not just a single deadline.
So Carolyn, there's another, Dean Herman, another MCAT question. So while you're on that, it's asking if you have any recommendations about selecting schools if they're going to not take the MCAT till July.
I think my advice would be, if you really don't know what your MCAT score is, but you're, for any number of reasons, you might be committed to going in this cycle, but you don't know what your MCAT score is, there's probably a few schools that you should apply to no matter what. So your state school, maybe there's some other school, you know, so I would pick the schools that no matter what my MCAT score is, unless it's just a fiasco and I'm withdrawing my application, I will definitely apply there. mark those when you initially submit. Then your application starts going through verification. When you actually get your score back, hopefully your application is nearly verified, or it might already be verified. And then you can decide, you can finalize a school list and add schools at that point. So the things that you can always still edit after submission are schools and your letters section.
And then there are a few that are grouped in the letter category. So I was thinking we could try to answer those together.
Excellent. Why don't I let you read those to me, Dean Jello?
And then, so I was surprised when the pre-recorded video said the recommendation letter process should start in August. Is there any benefit for getting recommendation letters to send info into the PIR earlier?
So so this year, I think that it is not as critical to have anything earlier because everything is just pushed back. So I do think this cycle is different. In normal years, we still feel like having your letters actually posted to your account by August, by early August, still puts you in the early applicant category. But that still means that you want to have us receive your letters, hopefully sometime in June, because it takes a couple of weeks for us to write for you and then be able to post your letters. This year, some of your letters come in later because faculty just aren't able to attend to that for whatever reason. I think we just all have to be flexible and patient with each other and all understand that everything is happening later anyway, so it's probably not a crisis.
And then who is the primary contact author in our letter packet?
You list me.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say that email was sent on May 1st. If you didn't get the email for whatever reason, just email prehealth@worcester.edu and I can forward you the information.
And there's another letter question, and it might be in that information. So it says some schools have letter of recommendation requirements phrased as cover letter or packet or individual letters. Example, 2 science letter plus 1 non-science letter. If our packet doesn't exactly match individual specifications, for example, the non-science is not a professor, will medical schools overlook that for the packet?
So here's that is a great question. That is a great question. Here's my thought on that. I think that whatever medical schools are saying about which kinds of letters they would like to review, if you were sending individual letters, is a pretty strong signal about what they value. And we are urging you to choose medical schools to apply to where there is a strong overlap between what you have valued, how you have spent your time, what you've done, and the institution's mission and priorities. So I would say that it's possible that a medical school would absolutely review your application because you're submitting a letter packet, but it may be at least a subtle signal that there's not as strong a fit and match overlap between your application portfolio and that school's, typical candidate portfolio as you might prefer. So while I think technically you might be qualified at that school, I think you should pay attention to, if you're not really meeting expectations at a number of schools you're applying to, you might need to rethink your list.
And then the other letter question I see, when letter writers send letters of recommendation to PreHealth at Worcester, do they stay in an applicant's file permanently?
Yes.
Well, permanently is a pretty strong word, but we promise to keep them at least 5 years. And after 5 years, you probably need new letters anyway.
Okay. So should I register for the CASPER exam ASAP, or when is the best time to do that?
We recommend that you take the CASPER exam in May, if possible. Depending on what your internet situation is, if you don't feel like you're going to have the opportunity, you're under a stay-at-home order and your internet is not that great and you want to wait until you can get to a location where you're going to have better internet, I think that's completely legitimate. And I really do think that timing is just a little less critical this cycle. But if you have the, if you have the capability to take it in May, that's probably, there's no reason not to.
And so I see a few questions on transcripts and listing stuff on the AMCAS. So it says, when sending our transcript to AMCAS, do we need to include our SSN or birthday?
I do not know the answer to that. That is a question for AMCAS.
And if you participated in study abroad programs like DIS, is it correct to not include them in the list of colleges you've attended, but do include them when submitting study abroad coursework?
So you are going to put DIS in the schools attended section, and then you're going to mark transcript exception request, and your transcript exception reason is going to be foreign college or university. I feel like the tutorial online is pretty helpful, so I would refer you to that as well. Only things really that are tricky about study abroad that I think the tutorial covers, but you still may not know like whether it applies to you, is if you've gone to an American university abroad, you must send a transcript, and you should look at the list of American universities abroad, because some of them don't say American universities. Some of them have other kinds of names. And then if you have a transcript here, because our study abroad program actually runs through another university, if you have a US transcript and we transferred your credit not from some school in, I don't know, Kenya, but we transferred your credit from a Canadian school, then you need to send that Canadian transcript, because US and Canadian transcripts are not foreign.
And someone asked, can you please go over the process of how to list a class under a department other than what it is listed under on my transcript? How will the verifiers be able to confirm that the listed department is accurate?
So my best suggestion for being sure that you are entering the correct information and that verifiers are going to agree with what you've entered is to work from your green official transcript. If you're trying to work from your internal record online, it is true that some things look different on your official transcript. It's not, subsections may not show up. There might be midterm grades are not going to be there. There are subtle differences between your official transcript and what you see online in WebStack. Just order a copy of your official transcript on WebStack, ask for an issued to student copy, and enter from that. And then I think there will not be much confusion, because it will be clear that you're seeing exactly the same thing the verifier will see.
Okay, and then there's another question about study abroad. And it says, do I put study abroad 101 as a course because it's listed on my transcript as a course, even though it was 0 credits and no grade received? And
again, I would work from your official transcript. If it's on your official transcript, you should enter it. And I honestly don't know the answer to that. So I think you should get your official transcript, and whatever is on your official transcript, you should enter it exactly as it appears.
Okay. And then I have questions about the activity list. So it says, do you recommend writing the description of each event in full sentences or bullet points to save space?
I don't recommend bullet points because it's a plain text text editor, sort of notepad kind of product in the web form that the AMCAS application is using. So bullet points are probably going to end up looking like weird characters when it's sort of saved. I do think you can write more in a resume style with sort of brief, not necessarily complete sentences, and I think that's okay, but I don't think you should use any special characters.
And then for the activities list, is it better to put an activity like Dean's List where that is visible on a transcript, or a remote internship that has barely started but you imagine will be impactful?
So Dean's List is so ubiquitous. I'm not sure that it's very impactful. And people who don't have Dean's List, it's probably because they were doing a bunch of, research for credit, which was mandatory pass fail, and, other things like that. So I think if you've got the space to put things like Dean's List, it's fine. It's not harmful, but I don't think it really gets a lot of attention either. We can already see your transcript and we can see your grades. Notations on the transcript, however, you're only entering your coursework and your grades. So notations on the transcript are not going to be visible on your AMCAS application. Is that?
Okay, that sounds good. You mentioned combining all shadowing experiences into one. Would it be recommended to combine some and leave one out that you choose as a most significant experience?
Oh, absolutely. I think people do that all the time. They've got one, much more robust or long-term shadowing experience that they make a most meaningful experience, but then they've done some other random shadowing here and there, and they, lump all those, sort of less, perhaps smaller experiences together into one category. That's absolutely okay.
And then should I project out my volunteer and work hours to May 2021 or stop at the end of this month when I submit my application?
I think that is really a style question. And I don't think that there's, I don't think projected hours either way are clear that they're going to be projected hours. I don't think it matters.
And if we have multiple publications from the same lab, should we list them as separate activities or should we condense them into one? If we are working on another paper for publication over the summer, is that also something to list separately? What have past applicants done with listing different presentations and publications?
So this is a great question. And I think that the answer to it depends on what kind of narrative you are shaping in your application. So if you have goals in academic medicine, you are really trying to attend a research intensive medical school and you are emphasizing your, sort of your interest in research as a huge part of your application narrative, then it makes sense to allocate more of those up to 15 activity slots to not only describing your research, but also sort of demonstrating your academic productivity in terms of papers. If you are emphasizing your community service and you are trying to apply to schools that, are very focused on community-based healthcare, primary care, and it just also happens that you've done a lot of research, I don't know that you would want to put quite so much emphasis in your activities section on research and make it look like that's the thing that you have the largest amount of depth in. So I think, how you display your activities is really going to depend on what you want readers to take away from your application, what you want the sense of your core narrative to be. But I think it is okay to combine publications, in just your research description, or to have more than one research description that includes a couple of publications.
And so I have another question or two questions that are very similar about course classification, and then I want to move on to grades. So it says, can I put an anthropology class that counted for NSM as a biology course on AMCAS? And someone asked the same about another class. But
whether it's NSM or not is neither here nor there. Experimental psych is an NSM course, but it is not biology. It's, it's a rigorous science course that, talks about hypothesis-driven research. It is absolutely an NSM course, but it's not a biology, chemistry, physics, or math course. So it really isn't about whether it's an NSM, it's about whether the content area was primarily biology. And since you took the course, that's why it's your responsibility to choose the course classification. Now, some of them are obvious. I don't need to take psych stats to know that it is a math class and that there's hardly but a thimbleful of psychology in it. So I can tell you, yes, you should classify psych stats as a math class. But on, you know, a lot of the anthropology classes and other kinds of psychology classes, I don't know what the balance between biology content and anthropology or psychology content was, because you took the class, you do know that. And so you should decide, was it mostly biology? If so, classify it as a biology class. If it wasn't mostly biology, it's probably should be classified as, you know, behavioral and social sciences if it was out of anthro or psych.
And to follow up on that, if you do have a course and you want to classify it as biology based on that content, someone is asking, what does the process of verification look like?
Mostly the AMCAS verifiers, because they know you took the course, will assume that you are classifying it correctly. Now, if the title of the course leads that particular verifier to believe that you are padding your application, or that you just don't understand it and have made a mistake, they might change it to some other classification. You'll be able to see that when you get your verified application back, and you can appeal any of those classification changes. So you don't submit any documentation to prove that your class out of anthro was actually a biology class, unless AMCAS reclassifies it, and then they probably will ask for some documentation as part of the appeal. But the appeal does not slow down your application. It doesn't make it change the timeline at which medical schools can view it. So it's not there's no risk to just, you should classify your courses the way you think they really should be classified. And mostly you won't get any challenges to that. But if you happen to get a challenge to that, it's pretty easy to resolve.
And so we have a number of students asking about grades. If someone earns a C- in a prereq, should it be retaken?
I would say the only time I do recommend retaking prerequisite courses is if you have a C- or lower. Now, some medical schools are going to be fine if you have additional upper level coursework. Like, let's say you got a C- in 2960, but then you actually decided to major in biology. So you have a ton of biology courses after that, but you never retook 2960 because they would count your C- toward the major. I don't know if they really do that or not, but let's pretend they do for here. In that case, some medical schools are going to be able to see that you majored in biology and continue to excel in it, and they wouldn't really be all that interested in seeing that you retook 2960 much later and did well in it. Well, duh, of course you're going to do well in it later. A few medical schools seem to be picky and insist that you have a solid C or better in specific courses that are prereqs. I think if you have a concern about that, the best thing really to do is once you've got a school list, first of all, try to see what they say online, but then if you can't get information that they've published, to communicate directly with the individual school's admissions office.
And so there are a few questions about pass-fail. And so if we had a class change to mandatory pass-fail, where should we attach the letter written by the department explaining the circumstances? In AMCAS?
Will not. I understand why that question is coming up. When the department gives you a letter and says, here, you can use this, you think, oh, okay, how do I use this? I don't think you need to use it. So first of all, a large number of medical schools have signed a document that states that they are accepting pass-fail coursework in spring 2020 without prejudice, meaning They don't care whether it was at your option or the school's option. They don't think that they're getting very much information from grades this semester anyway, and they're basically ignoring this semester in their evaluations. Because if people excelled, what does that mean? Does that mean they had better access to resources, or does that mean that their, you know, sort of faculty just kind of like threw in the towel and gave everybody A's? I mean, across the country, there are just lots of different scenarios. So schools don't think they're getting very much signal. They think that the grades this semester are like all noise. And I just don't think that they really care. Physics did post midterm grades for everyone. I went in and looked at a couple of people who were, you know, not first year students, and they all had midterm grades, even if they were A's or, you know, whatever. If you had a strong upward trend and you were really hoping that, you know, a 4-credit course like physics that you had an A in at the end of the semester was really going to help your final science GPA, and you're, you know, especially distressed that that is yet another thing that has been taken away from you this semester. What I can say is that we are sort of highlighting that in cover letters, where people were building an upward trend, had an A in midterm at physics, and then now just have a pass. We're kind of gonna, I wouldn't say we're gonna belabor it, but we're gonna draw attention to it. For the rest of you who have been doing well all along and now have a pass, it's going to be fine. We may put a note in the, you know, sort of in the place where we have our FERPA stuff that kind of says, you know, all, you know, physics, if all physics grades were on a pass-fail basis at the instructor's choice, because of the difficulty of delivering online evaluations, and just leave it at that.
Okay, and so someone is asking, does everyone need to take the CASPER exam?
So that's a good question. I would say most people will end up interviewing, or most people will end up applying at least one school that requires CASPER. And so it is something you have to pay for. So if, you know, you're on a tight budget, you might want to make sure you have your school list nailed down and see if one or more of your schools is insisting on CASPER. You know, if you're, it is money, but it's also like not anywhere near as much as like taking the MCAT or filing your AMCAS. So if you know, want to just take it and then you have a score sitting out there and then you can send it wherever you're going to send it, that's okay too. Most of you will end up taking it.
Okay, so AMCAS, back to some AMCAS questions. It says the AMCAS biographical information requires a list of parents and siblings. Do I include half siblings and a biological parent with whom I don't interact with much? How is this information used?
I have no idea. That is such a great question. And I would actually direct that question to AMCAS. And my guess is also in terms of how the information is used, that's like up to the schools. They're not going to be able to tell you how the information is used, but they could probably tell you like what they think schools' preferences are on sort of how, what are the boundaries around, you know, how much of this information are they really looking for if you have a really complex family situation with lots and lots of, you know, people that could technically be included.
And then I guess some more on how do we know what our AMCAS ID number is?
You know your AMCAS ID from logging into your account. You got an AMCAS ID number when you took the MCAT, and it stays the same for your AMCAS application.
I think it's also labeled the AAMC ID. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe that's where some of the confusion is coming in. It's AAMC ID. Does that help?
And there are a couple of students who are asking questions about dental school. I think what we will do is in the chat, maybe put Dean Davis's email, because I think that these might be most appropriate. It says, do they have similar date with regarding schools? will have access to our application. And then there's another dental school question. So
I would love for students to be in touch with Dean Davis, because I think he definitely is more informed than I am about the, really nitty gritty about dental school. I would also urge you to remember, though, that he is our point person for the art side portion of commencement, which is, of course, just hard and sad this year for all seniors. But until we do our online recognition ceremony, I think that he is stretched thin. So I think it might be best to direct questions to him right after the online recognition ceremony.
Okay, back to the activities list. If I choose an activity to be the most meaningful, should I treat the 700 plus 1325 character as a whole essay or separate?
I mean, I think you will still, it is two separate text boxes, so I wouldn't have half a sentence in one and then, the second half of a sentence in the other. And so I think you still, in the first 700 characters, will describe, kind of what your, what the organization or activity was in some cases, what your specific role was. And then, if you want to have a sort of elevator pitch statement about what you got out of it in the 700 characters, and then in the 1300 characters sort of expand on that, I think that could be a good approach.
And then we have a couple of questions about transcripts. How do I go about sending transcripts to AMCAS, getting a copy of my own official transcript?
All transcript requests are on Webstack.
Exactly. And someone is asking if they need to order one for themselves to enter their grades.
Yes, order a transcript for yourself to work from.
And there are a couple more questions about the semester and the upward trends. If I did have a good semester, will the fact that grades this semester will be regarded as noise interfere with the upward trend I was hoping to show in my grades from freshman year to senior year?
I don't think it interferes. I think, realistically, if fall of, fall of 19 was the first really super solid semester you had, and then you were hoping to, kind of have this semester be also a really important, really strong semester, the sort of evidence that you're providing may be slightly weakened. I think that is a fair, a fair take home of the situation. It's obviously through no fault of yours. I don't think you're going to be dinged for it, but I do think they may feel like they have not as much information about your ability to sustain a record of excellence as they would like. I think that is something to really be in conversation with your pre-health advisor about. I think that is the point of holistic review, right? It's looking at all of your academic record in context, but also all of your academic record in context of everything else. What else was going on for you? What does the rest of your application look like? I think there are lots of nuances there that we can't possibly cover in a, sort of one size fits all webinar. And I think those are great conversations to have individually with your pre-health advisor. And I'm also happy to give a second opinion. So you can always, make an appointment on my online calendar or jump into my Zoom in Thursday hours. And I'm happy to talk that through with you as well.
And is it okay to take summer courses to boost your science GPA, even though it will be remote learning this summer?
I think if you're getting ready to apply, summer courses may not be your most productive choice, because I am hoping that you're going to be submitting before you would have summer grades posted, which the earliest summer grades, at least at WashU. I mean, I guess if you're going to do something in that little Maymester, maybe, but the earliest summer grades at WashU are posted in early July. I'm wanting you to submit before then. So I don't think for people who are actually actively planning to apply this semester that summer makes sense as an enhancement, GPA enhancement opportunity. For people who are holding off for whatever reason, even if they'd originally been planning to apply now and are not at this moment, I think summer is just as good as any other time. You know, I think that things may be uneven. And we may have some combination of remote and in-person delivery for a while. And so there's no reason to not take summer courses just because they're online. I think schools are just going to view those as courses at this point.
And if we make a course pass-fail for this semester, should we wait until May 15 to request transcripts?
Oh, good question. I would at least wait until you can see that all your grade options are appearing online or finalized. Like, I don't know exactly when we're gonna, you know, hit the trigger. If we're doing them all, it's like a one like automated thing, or if as people fill out the web form, if somebody's going in by hand and changing those. I honestly don't know the answer to that, because that's like just, that's, I don't work in that part of our shop very much. But definitely don't request your transcript until everything looks the way you want it to on your transcript.
And if we had uncharacteristically bad grades one semester and explain the cause for these poor grades in our PIR questions, will you include the reason in our cover letter, or is it up to us to try to explain it in our personal statement or somewhere else on our application?
So generally, if we can, I mean, hopefully you had a good conversation with your pre-health advisor. You know, if it makes sense to include mitigating information about one semester that, you know, is anomalous, we certainly do that in the cover letter. That's one of our opportunities to assist you in the cover letter. You know, depending on what if somebody had a concussion and they, you know, really struggled coming back from that and couldn't complete assignments in very timely fashion, and, you know, were really restricted from screens, and, you know, the accommodations weren't all that helpful or effective, you know, certainly we would talk about that in the cover letter, and there'd be no reason not to. If it was a medical issue, we need a sense from you that you want us, that you're planning to, or that you're happy disclosing that, and that you want us to talk about that. We wouldn't discuss your medical history without your permission. You know, so I think if you didn't have a really clear conversation with your pre-health advisor during your PIR meeting about what you hope will be said, especially if it might be a sensitive topic, and that can even be, you know, a death in the family. Not everybody is going to want to be asked about someone close to them passing in an interview situation. And so if it's something you don't want to talk about it, maybe you don't want to bring it up at all. So those are just good things to process individually with your pre-health advisor if it seems like it's sensitive, and therefore we might shy away from it unless we had your explicit permission to share.
And if I got a C- in general chemistry, which I took at my state school in high school, and I never used it for credit in college, do I have to report it to AMCAS? Will it be a part of my AMCAS BCPM GPA?
The answer is yes to both. You are obligated to send any transcript that you have from any point in your life at any American or Canadian college or university. And if it was a science class, it will be included in your AMCAS GPA, in your BCPM.
And when applying to a broad range of schools because of a high GPA and a lower MCAT, is there any way to professionally explain why my MCAT score might be a few points lower than their median?
So I guess so some people may be asking this question because they took an MCAT, they'd planned to, you know, it didn't go as well as they'd hoped for any number of reasons. They'd planned to retake and all their retakes have been canceled, and they're not sure if they're really going to get to retake. If that is the situation, and your high school, you know, results on college entrance exams were, you know, considerably outperformed that the AMCAS score you're holding, we're happy to talk about that in your cover letter. Some schools may actually ask for that information, others are not going to, but we will talk about that. If you know, if you just want to make sure that we're mentioning that in your cover letter, you can send your pre-health advisor or me an email, and we'll make sure that that, you know, gets noted in a way that it won't be missed. If you just, you know, kind of aren't all that great at standardized tests, those don't come naturally for you, and you know, your ACT or SAT were on the lower end for a school like WashU as well, I would say probably the less said about it, the better. I would, you know, just, I would focus on other aspects of my application.
And going back to recommendation letters. For rec letters, I want to get one from a member of the anthropology department. However, he taught me in anthro classes on non-human primates and biomechanics. Would he still count as a non-science letter writer? How can I tell if classes are non-science, even if they are in anthro?
So this, I know this is a confusing topic for students, and the reason that it is confusing is that it is not up to us, and that's why we don't have any policy statements or rules for you to follow. So some schools don't even care if you have a non-science letter. Others do want one. So the first thing you have to do is really look at what are the schools you're applying to, signaling that they, you know, what kind of information, evaluative information do they really want to receive. If you're applying to a bunch of schools that have, you know, WashU School of Medicine, for example, says letters from people who can evaluate your work. They don't have any specific categories. Other schools do have very, you know, sort of specific categories. If you are not applying to schools with specific categories, you don't need to fret about this. If you are applying to schools that are signaling that they want particular kinds of information and you're not sure whether you're providing it to them, I think that's something you have to ask their admissions office about. You need to correspond with them about whether this would be, you know, positively regarded.
Going back to the activities list, should all of our most meaningful experiences relate to our interest in medicine? I'm very involved in my sorority and would like to consider it as one of my most meaningful experiences from college and spend a lot of time on it, but I don't think it has any relation to my interest in medicine.
That is a great question. So I do think that sometimes people have built important skills and capacities, things that are not, you know, not medically related at all, but the skills and capacities that they've built there, the competencies they've built, are still going to be important to their success in medical school or their success as physicians. But I don't think you're going to want to include things unless you can tie it to competencies that medical schools are asking for, at least as the most meaningful. You can certainly include anything. You can include your hobbies and just, you know, that's, you know, sort of how you, you know, manage stress and, you know, create balance in your life. So you can put anything, but in terms of making something the most meaningful, I would not do that unless I could name specific competencies that I built, or if it clearly important to me, you know, confirming my career direction.
And on the, what do we need to do to study or prepare for CASPER? And can we add more schools to send CASPER after we take it?
So you can send your CASPER score to schools later. I think it's, you know, I think it's one of these things, sort of like the, you know, probably how the ACT was, if, you know, if my memory serves, if you enter some schools when you take it, it's all one fee. And I don't know what the limit is on how many schools you can send it to right out of the box. And if you have to send additional scores, you have to pay for those individually as well. So you may want to look at the details of, like, if the money matters to you, and it would at my house, it would definitely matter. You might want to look at, you know, sort of how the payment part will work before you, you know, decide to take it, and to see if, do I really need to have my school list finalized first? Yeah, I think, does that answer that? Was there another part? Okay.
How should we approach building a school list in terms of matching stats for a higher MCAT score and slightly lower GPA?
By and large, I think that you should have at least 6 to 8 schools where your science GPA is, clearly in range for them. So I would say I would lean a little more on science GPA than on MCAT. But I would also use the WashU specific data. I wouldn't use the MSAR data exclusively in looking at those GPA matches, because you can see that there are a number of schools that if you compare the WashU middle 50% for matriculants to the national sort of middle 50% for that school, they're pretty different.
Another question about courses. If I took probability and statistics in the summer at a community college and took psych stats at WashU, will they be counted as the same course to AMCAS? Will only one of them count in my BCPM, or will both be counted?
Both. You must enter both courses. Both are counted, and that is actually true even if you take the exact same course. If you take Bio 2960 twice at WashU, you must enter both enrollments and both grades, and they will both count in your BCPM GPA.
For juniors applying, do we write down our class plans for the 2020-21 school year in our ideal situation, ignoring waitlist for classes?
I would say no to that. I don't think you're not obligated to list any of your coursework that is future or in progress, and it won't be verified. So it's completely optional. I would probably only list things that I was absolutely sure I was going to take, and I would probably mostly use that to signal to medical schools that I'm going to be meeting a requirement of theirs later and haven't already met it. So if I wasn't taking biochemistry till my senior year, even though I'd already taken the MCAT, but I'm taking it in the fall and I'm already enrolled in it, I would go ahead and list biochemistry. But I wouldn't list waitlisted courses, because I think you don't really want to have a lot of confusing back and forth with them later about how what you reported on your application is no longer accurate. That's just not, I just don't think, it's not like the end of the world, but I just don't think it's like a helpful kind of communication.
And how do people approach putting down hobbies on the activities list?
I think some people do share their hobbies, other people don't, and that's just completely a style question.
And thus far, we have gone through all of the questions that have been posted. I don't know, Ms. Heiger, did you see the question earlier about the 8-number AAMC request? It disappeared.
Yeah, and I did ask that student to email me directly.
Okay.
Well, we're actually almost at an hour here, and I would say from every webinar I've been to, after an hour, I just want to start crying or I must leave my computer. So you all may feel like that too. Let's see, how do we implement in core themes in our primary application? What if the Readiness Center appointments are booked? So the Readiness Center, usually, I don't know what they're doing this year because, everything's kind of a little topsy-turvy. But usually the Writing Center closes for a couple of weeks and then they reopen for summer to support summer coursework. I am sure that I don't know for sure if they're closing for a couple of weeks, but I am absolutely sure that they will be open for business for summer courses. So you may not be able to book an appointment with them right this second, but they will have appointments open in May as soon as summer 1 has started, which is basically like right after graduation. So I would say, be patient. Get an appointment with them as soon as they post more appointments. And then in terms of, I think in terms of conveying your core narrative in your primary application, you've got a 5,300 character personal statement. You've also got 3 most meaningful activities that between the 700 for the activity description and the 1300 for why it's most meaningful is another 2,000 characters apiece, so 6,000 over there. So you've got over 11,000 characters as opportunities to communicate what's really important to you, what you value, what your vision is for you know, a patient-centered future in medicine. And that all of those pieces should be kind of pulling in the same direction or working together. They shouldn't be repetitive, but they should be synergistic.
And do you see the question that's pretty much similar, but they're asking—
Oh, how many of our experiences from our personal statement should overlap with our most meaningful experiences? Should I try to vary my most meaningful experiences and what I discuss in my personal statement? So this is an opinion and it's a style issue. I think it sends kind of a funny message if nothing in your personal statement is also a most meaningful experience. Like, why are you writing about all these things that aren't really that meaningful to you in your personal statement? So I think that's kind of weird if people do that. But I also think you're not obligated to discuss all three of your most meaningful experiences in your personal statement. So I think there should be some overlap. I don't think the Venn diagram should be zero overlap, but I definitely don't think it has to be 100% either. All right, I have an online calendar. I will be back on Zoom next Thursday. We have email and we'd love to keep helping.
And I'll just say that there is another live session at 12:30, establishing and maintaining professional relationships, that I think speaks to any student, no matter what field they go into. And so hopefully you will join us there.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming and asking questions.
Thank you.